Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for over 16 years, and he prided himself on being able to read people within the first few seconds of meeting them. He could tell who would be funny, who would freeze under pressure, who would give the most outrageous answers that would make for viral clips. But when 73-year-old Eleanor Hayes walked onto the Family Feud stage that October afternoon in 2024, Steve found himself completely unable to read her. She stood alone at the family podium, a small, elegant woman with silver hair swept into a neat bun, wearing a navy blue dress with pearl earrings that caught the studio lights. Her posture was perfect, her smile was warm, but there was something in her eyes, a depth of emotion that Steve couldn't quite identify, that made him pause. Before we dive into Eleanor's incredible story, if you're someone who believes in the power of love, family, and never giving up hope, please hit that like button and subscribe. What you're about to hear will stay with you long after this video ends. I promise you that. The audience had noticed immediately that something was different about this taping. Typically, Family Feud featured 2 families of 5 members each, all wearing matching shirts, laughing and joking with each other during the introduction. But today, standing across from the Rodriguez family from Miami, a boisterous, energetic group of parents, children, and cousins, was just Eleanor Hayes. One woman. Alone. The producers had set up the podium as they normally would, but the 4 spaces beside Eleanor remained empty, a visual reminder of the absence that everyone in the studio could feel, but nobody yet understood. Steve Harvey approached Eleanor with his characteristic warmth, microphone in hand, ready to do his usual family introductions. But as he got closer, he noticed the slight tremor in Eleanor's hands, the way she was gripping the podium as if it were the only thing keeping her standing. Her smile never wavered, but Steve, with his decades of experience reading human emotion, could see that this woman was holding herself together through sheer force of will. Steve started with what should have been a simple question, the same question he asked every family at the start of every show. So, Eleanor, tell me about your family. Where is everyone? The studio fell quiet. The Rodriguez family, who had been chatting and laughing among themselves, stopped and turned to look. The audience leaned forward in their seats. Eleanor took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. But there was something underneath it. A weight, a history, a story that was pressing to be told. Well, Steve, she said, that's a bit of a long story. I came here alone because my family couldn't be here with me today. But they're here in spirit, every single one of them. Steve nodded slowly, his instincts telling him that there was much more to this answer than Eleanor was saying. He glanced at the producers off stage, and he could see they were just as confused as he was. The paperwork for the Hayes family had listed 5 members, just like every other family. But clearly, something had changed. Eleanor, Steve said gently, I'm going to be honest with you. In all my years of hosting this show, I've never had a family of 1. Usually, we need 5 people to play the game. Can you help me understand what's going on here? Eleanor's smile faltered for just a moment, and Steve saw tears begin to form in her eyes, though she blinked them back with determination. She looked out at the audience, then back at Steve, and she made a decision. She had come this far. She had made it to this stage, to this moment. She wasn't going to back down now. Mr. Harvey, Eleanor began, and her voice carried across the silent studio. I applied to be on Family Feud 6 months ago with my whole family. My husband Thomas, my daughter Rebecca, my son James, and my grandson Matthew. We were all so excited. We made matching t-shirts. We practiced every night watching your show, studying the questions and trying to guess the answers. My grandson Matthew, he's 12. He made a whole notebook of common Family Feud answers, organized by category. We were ready. We were so ready. Steve listened, and he could feel the story turning, could sense the shadow that was about to fall across this cheerful memory. Eleanor continued, her voice growing quieter, but no less steady. 2 weeks after we applied, my husband Thomas had a stroke. He was 75, healthy as could be, or so we thought. But the stroke was severe. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital, and then he came home with us because he needed round-the-clock care. He couldn't walk, could barely speak, but his mind was still sharp. He could understand everything. And you know what he asked me, the very first day he came home? Eleanor paused, and a tear finally escaped, rolling down her cheek. He asked me if we had heard back from Family Feud yet. He asked if we were still going to get our chance. The studio audience was completely silent now. Steve Harvey stood perfectly still, holding the microphone, giving Eleanor the space to continue. She wiped the tear away and kept talking, her voice growing stronger, as if telling this story was giving her energy rather than taking it away. I told Thomas that it didn't matter, that we would apply again when he was better, that Family Feud would always be there. But Thomas looked at me with those eyes. You know the look, the one that says a person knows something you don't want to admit. And he said, "Ellie, we both know I'm not getting better, but promise me something. If we get the call, if we get chosen, you go. You take the family, and you go. And you play the game for me." Eleanor's voice broke slightly, but she pushed through. 3 weeks later, we got the call. We had been selected to be on Family Feud. The whole family was thrilled, but Thomas was the most excited of all. He started planning what we would do with the money if we won. He wanted to take the whole family to Ireland to see the country where his grandparents had come from. He talked about it every day, describing the trip in such detail that it was like he could see it happening. Steve Harvey felt his own throat tightening with emotion. He had a feeling he knew where this story was going, but he let Eleanor continue at her own pace, respecting her need to tell it in her own words. 1 month ago, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, Thomas passed away. He died at home, surrounded by all of us, holding my hand. And do you know what his last words to me were? Steve shook his head, unable to speak. Eleanor smiled through her tears. He said, "Don't forget Family Feud, Ellie. You promised. You go and you win, and you tell Steve Harvey that Thomas Hayes said hello." The audience gasped collectively. Several people in the front rows were openly crying. Steve Harvey, a man known for his quick wit and ability to handle any situation with humor, found himself blinking back tears, his usual composure completely shattered. "But Eleanor," Steve finally managed to say, "what about the rest of your family? Your daughter, your son, your grandson? Where are they?" Eleanor's expression shifted, and now the tears came freely. She didn't try to stop them. 2 weeks after Thomas died, she said, "My daughter Rebecca was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. She's 48 years old, Mr. Harvey. She has 2 children, a career she loves, a whole life ahead of her. And now she's in treatment, undergoing aggressive chemotherapy that leaves her so weak she can barely get out of bed most days." Eleanor took a shaky breath. "My son James, he lives in Seattle. He's an environmental scientist, and he's currently in the Arctic on a research expedition that was planned 2 years ago. He couldn't get back in time for his father's funeral, and he can't get back for this. He's devastated, but his work is important. It's studying climate change patterns that could affect millions of people. And my grandson Matthew, Rebecca's son, he's staying with his father this month because Rebecca is too sick to care for him right now, and his father lives in Boston. Everyone is scattered. Everyone is dealing with their own crisis, and I'm here alone." The silence in the studio was profound. Steve Harvey stood there, microphone in hand, and for one of the rare times in his career, he had absolutely no idea what to say. He looked at this 73-year-old woman standing alone at the podium, carrying the weight of her dying daughter, her absent son, her displaced grandson, and her dead husband's final wish, and he felt completely overwhelmed by the courage and love radiating from her. "Eleanor," Steve finally said, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to do this. We can reschedule. We can wait until your family can be here. We can." But Eleanor interrupted him gently but firmly. "Mr. Harvey, with all due respect, I do have to do this. I made a promise to my husband. I made a promise to my family. We were supposed to be here together, and we're not. And that breaks my heart in ways I can't even begin to express. But I'm here, and I'm going to play this game, because that's what my Thomas wanted. That's what my whole family wanted. And maybe I can't win the money for our trip to Ireland anymore, but I can honor my husband's memory. I can show my daughter that we keep fighting even when everything seems impossible. I can make my grandson proud. I can do this for all of them." Steve Harvey looked at Eleanor Hayes, and then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He set down his microphone, walked over to Eleanor, and pulled her into a tight hug. The audience erupted in applause, many of them standing, many of them crying openly. When Steve finally stepped back, he picked up his microphone and turned to address the producers off stage. "We need to talk," he said. "Can we take a break?" The audience was asked to remain seated while Steve, Eleanor, and the production team gathered off stage. The Rodriguez family, who had been watching this entire exchange with tears in their own eyes, immediately went to Eleanor and expressed their support, telling her they would do whatever was needed, that they were honored to be part of her story. Off stage, Steve spoke with the producers about the situation. The problem was clear. Family Feud required 5 people to play the game. The format didn't work with just one person. But Steve Harvey was not willing to send Eleanor Hayes home without playing. He had been moved by her story, by her determination, by the promise she was keeping to her late husband, and he was going to find a way to make this work. The producers huddled together, discussing options. They could find 4 audience members to play with Eleanor, turning it into a different kind of game. They could modify the rules to create a special one-person version. They could bring in previous contestants or staff members. Ideas flew back and forth, but nothing felt right. Eleanor had come to play Family Feud with her family, and while her family couldn't physically be there had to be a way to honor that. Finally, Eleanor herself spoke up. She had been standing quietly, listening to all the discussions, and now she had an idea. "What if," she said slowly, "what if we play the game as if my family were here? I'll answer the questions, but I'll answer them the way each of my family members would have answered. I'll play for Thomas, for Rebecca, for James, for Matthew. I'll be all 5 of us." The producers looked skeptical. That wasn't how the game worked. But Steve Harvey looked at Eleanor, at the determination in her eyes, at the love pouring out of her, and he made a decision. "We're going to do this," Steve announced. "Eleanor is going to play for her family. All of them. We'll modify the format. When it's her turn to answer, she'll tell us who she's answering as, and she'll give us the answer that person would have given. It's not traditional, but nothing about this situation is traditional. And if there's one thing I've learned in all my years of doing this show, it's that sometimes you have to break the rules to do the right thing." The producers agreed, moved by both Eleanor's story and Steve's conviction. They would make it work. They went back on stage, and Steve explained to the audience what was going to happen. He told them about Thomas Hayes and his dying wish, about Rebecca fighting cancer, about James in the Arctic, about young Matthew staying with his father. He told them that Eleanor Hayes was going to play Family Feud for her entire family, and that this was going to be unlike any episode they had ever filmed. The audience gave Eleanor a standing ovation that lasted almost 2 minutes. The game began. Steve asked the first question, a standard Family Feud survey question about things people forget to pack when they go on vacation. Eleanor stepped up to the podium and said, "I'm answering as Thomas, my husband." Thomas would say, "Toothbrush," because he forgot his toothbrush on literally every vacation we ever took in 52 years of marriage. The answer was on the board, number 3. The audience cheered. For the next answer, Eleanor said, "I'm answering as Rebecca, my daughter." Rebecca would say phone charger because she's constantly worried about her phone dying and missing an important call from her kids. Phone charger was the number 1 answer. The audience went wild. Question after question, Eleanor answered as different members of her family. She answered as James, the scientist, giving analytical, practical answers. She answered as Matthew, the 12-year-old grandson, giving answers that reflected a child's perspective. And she answered as Thomas again and again, sharing little stories about his quirks and habits that brought him to life for the audience, making them laugh and cry simultaneously. What was remarkable was how well Eleanor knew her family. She didn't just guess at what they might say. She knew them so deeply, so completely, that her answers captured their personalities, their ways of thinking, their individual perspectives. When she answered as Rebecca, you could hear a mother's intimate knowledge of her daughter. When she answered as Matthew, you could feel the special bond between grandmother and grandson. When she answered as James, you could sense her pride in her son's intelligence and dedication. And when she answered as Thomas, it was like he was there in the room with them, his presence so vivid in Eleanor's words and memories that he became real to everyone watching. The Rodriguez family played their turns with grace and kindness, clearly understanding that this game was about something much bigger than competition. When they gave wrong answers, they didn't seem disappointed. When Eleanor's family gave right answers, the Rodriguez family cheered as loudly as anyone. This had stopped being a game show and had become something else entirely, a memorial, a love letter, a testament to the bonds of family. As the game progressed, Steve Harvey found himself completely abandoning his usual hosting style. Instead of joking and mugging for the camera, he was simply listening, giving Eleanor space to share memories and stories with each answer. When Eleanor answered as Thomas, Steve would ask gentle questions. What was Thomas like? How did you meet? What made him laugh? Eleanor would answer, and with each answer, the audience fell more in love with this man they had never met. This man who had died wanting his wife to play a game show. This man whose final words had been a reminder of a promise. When Eleanor answered as Rebecca, Steve's questions were tender, careful. Tell me about your daughter. What's she like? What do you hope for her? Eleanor spoke about Rebecca's strength, her kindness, her determination to beat the cancer that was ravaging her body. She spoke about how Rebecca had insisted that Eleanor come to the show even though she was sick, how Rebecca had said that the family needed something to celebrate, something to hope for, even in the midst of crisis. When Eleanor answered as James, Steve asked about the work her son was doing in the Arctic. Eleanor's face lit up with pride as she described James's research, his passion for protecting the environment, his dedication to work that might help save the planet for his son's generation. She talked about how James had called her from a satellite phone after Thomas died, crying across thousands of miles of distance, apologizing for not being there. She had told him the same thing she had told everyone, that love doesn't require physical presence, that she carried all of them with her wherever she went. When Eleanor answered as Matthew, her 12-year-old grandson, the tenderness in her voice was palpable. She spoke about how Matthew was struggling with his grandfather's death, with his mother's illness, with feeling like his whole family was falling apart. She talked about how he had helped her practice for Family Feud, using his notebook of answers, how he had made her promise to do the special handshake he had invented if she won any money. Steve asked what the handshake was, and Eleanor demonstrated it, a complicated series of hand movements and finger snaps that made everyone laugh and cry at the same time. Round after round, Eleanor played for her family. She wasn't a particularly quick player. She didn't give flashy or funny answers, but she played with such heart, such genuine love and knowledge of her family members, that the studio was completely captivated. The Rodriguez family ended up winning the main game, but it didn't matter. Everyone knew that Eleanor had already won something far more important than money or points. She had kept her promise. She had honored her family. She had shown what love looks like when it refuses to give up, even in the face of devastating loss. As they prepared for the fast money round, which the Rodriguez family would play since they had won, Steve Harvey made an unprecedented decision. He asked the producers if Eleanor could play fast money too, not against the Rodriguez family, but just for herself, just to complete the full Family Feud experience that Thomas had wanted her to have. The producers agreed immediately. The Rodriguez family played their fast money round first, and they did well, winning money for their family. They celebrated graciously, and then they did something beautiful. The entire Rodriguez family walked over to Eleanor and asked if they could stay on stage while she played her fast money round. They wanted to support her, to be the family she didn't have there with her. Eleanor, crying now without any attempt to hide it, agreed. Steve set up Eleanor's fast money round with extraordinary care. He explained that she would answer all 5 questions herself, but that she would dedicate each answer to a different family member. The first answer would be for Thomas, the second for Rebecca, the third for James, the fourth for Matthew, and the fifth for herself. The audience was completely silent as Steve began. Name a place people go to relax. Eleanor said, the beach for Thomas. He loved the ocean more than anywhere else on earth. It was the #1 answer. Name something you might find in a woman's purse. Lipstick for Rebecca. My daughter never left the house without her lipstick, even now during chemo. #2 answer. Name a type of scientist. Environmental scientist for James, because that's what he is, and I'm so proud of him. It was on the board. Name something kids love to do in summer. Go to camp for Matthew. He goes to science camp every summer, and it's his favorite thing in the world. #3 answer. And finally, name something you might do to celebrate good news. Call your family, Eleanor said, and her voice broke completely. Because that's what I want to do right now. I want to call Thomas and tell him I did it. I want to call Rebecca and tell her to keep fighting because miracles happen. I want to call James, even though he's thousands of miles away. I want to call Matthew and do our special handshake. I want to call my family. The answer was on the board. Eleanor had scored enough points that if this had been a real competitive round, she would have won. But more than that, she had honored each member of her family, had spoken their names, had made them present in that room in a way that transcended physical absence. The audience was on their feet, crying, applauding, experiencing something that went far beyond entertainment. Steve Harvey stood next to Eleanor, and he was crying too, not trying to hide it, not making jokes to diffuse the emotion, just standing in the fullness of the moment. Eleanor, Steve said, when the audience finally quieted down, I've been doing this show for a long time. I've seen a lot of families, heard a lot of stories, but I have never, and I mean never, experienced anything like what just happened here. You came here alone, but you weren't alone. Your family was here, in every answer, in every memory, in every story you told. You kept your promise to your husband. You honored your family, and you've taught everyone in this room, everyone who's going to watch this, something profound about what love really means. Eleanor smiled through her tears and said something that Steve would later say was one of the most powerful statements he had ever heard on television. "Mr. Harvey, I didn't come here alone. I could never be alone as long as I carry my family in my heart. Thomas is with me in every decision I make. Rebecca is with me in every moment of strength I find. James is with me in every beautiful thing I notice in the world. Matthew is with me in every moment of joy and wonder. They're not here physically, but they're here. They're always here." Steve then did something that had never been done in Family Feud history. He announced that the show was going to make a special donation to ovarian cancer research in Rebecca Hayes' name, and that they were also going to cover the cost of sending Eleanor to Ireland to take the trip that Thomas had dreamed of so that she could carry his ashes there and complete his final journey. The audience erupted in cheers and tears. Eleanor collapsed into Steve's arms, sobbing, overwhelmed by the generosity and kindness. But Steve wasn't finished. He said that Family Feud wanted to fly Matthew out to Los Angeles so that he could do his special handshake with his grandmother on camera, so that he could be part of this moment, even though he had missed the original taping. And they wanted to send a video crew to visit Rebecca in the hospital, so that she could see what her mother had done, could see the love and strength and determination that Eleanor had displayed. They wanted the whole family to be part of the story, even if they couldn't all be in the same room. Over the next several weeks, Family Feud followed through on every promise. Matthew flew to Los Angeles with his father, and the video of him doing his special handshake with Eleanor, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously, became one of the most viewed clips in Family Feud history. The video crew visited Rebecca in the hospital between chemotherapy treatments, and they filmed her watching her mother's episode. Rebecca cried through the entire thing, saying over and over, "That's my mom. That's my strong, amazing mom." She said that watching Eleanor honor the family, seeing the way her mother had brought each of them to life through her answers and stories, had given her renewed strength to fight the cancer. If her 73-year-old mother could stand on that stage alone and be brave for all of them, then she could be brave enough to keep fighting for her life. James called in from the Arctic via satellite phone, and his message was recorded and added to the episode. He talked about watching the video of his mother's appearance on a small laptop in a research station at the top of the world, crying in front of his colleagues, feeling simultaneously heartbroken that he had missed it and incredibly proud of what his mother had done. He said his father would have been so proud, that his whole family was proud, that Eleanor Hayes was the strongest person he had ever known. When the episode finally aired 2 months later, it broke records. It became the most watched Family Feud episode of all time. The response from viewers was overwhelming. The show received over 50,000 messages in the first week alone. People shared their own stories of loss, of keeping promises to deceased loved ones, of honoring family members who couldn't be physically present. Cancer support groups used Eleanor's story to inspire patients and families going through treatment. Grief counselors shared clips from the episode to help people understand that love persists beyond death, that our connections to family members don't end when they die, but continue in how we live our lives and honor their memory. Major media outlets picked up the story. Eleanor was invited to appear on talk shows, to share her experience and talk about Thomas, about Rebecca's ongoing fight, about the power of keeping promises. She did some of these appearances, but turned down many others, saying that she wasn't looking for fame. She had simply been doing what any wife would do, honoring a promise to her husband. But she did agree to do interviews that raised awareness about ovarian cancer, wanting to use her unexpected platform to help other families facing the same battle that Rebecca was fighting. Steve Harvey spoke about Eleanor's episode in nearly every interview he did for months afterward. He said it had fundamentally changed his understanding of his job. He had always known that Family Feud was about families, but he had thought of it primarily as entertainment, as a fun way for families to spend time together and maybe win some money. Eleanor had shown him that the show could be something deeper, a place where families could honor each other, could celebrate their bonds, could make meaning out of loss and difficulty. He said that he approached every family differently now, listening more carefully for the stories beneath the surface, creating space for emotion and authenticity, understanding that every person who stepped up to that podium was carrying a history and a heart full of love and sometimes pain. The experience changed the show itself in subtle but important ways. Producers became more flexible with the format, more willing to adapt when special circumstances arose. They created a foundation to help families dealing with medical crises, inspired by the Hayes family's story. They began featuring more diverse family structures on the show, understanding that family isn't always nuclear or traditional, that it comes in many forms, and that all of them are valid and worthy of celebration. For Eleanor Hayes herself, the experience was transformative. The trip to Ireland that Family Feud sponsored became a sacred journey. She traveled to the small village where Thomas's grandparents had been born, scattered some of his ashes in the soil there, and spent time exploring the country he had always dreamed of seeing. She said she felt Thomas with her on every step of that journey, could almost hear him exclaiming over the green hills and ancient stone walls, could picture his face lit up with joy at finally connecting with his heritage. She brought back soil from Ireland and mixed it with the rest of Thomas's ashes, which she kept in a beautiful urn in her living room, along with the photographs and memories of their 52 years together. Rebecca's battle with cancer continued for another year and a half after Eleanor's Family Feud appearance. The treatment was brutal, the outcome uncertain, but Rebecca fought with everything she had. She said later that her mother's example, the way Eleanor had stood on that stage alone and been strong for all of them, had given her a model for courage. If her mother could face her fears and keep going in the midst of overwhelming grief, then Rebecca could face her cancer and keep fighting. And fight she did, through surgery and chemotherapy and radiation, through dark days when the future seemed impossible and brighter days when hope felt real again. Remarkably, miraculously, Rebecca went into remission. 2 years after Eleanor's Family Feud appearance, Rebecca was declared cancer-free. The entire family gathered to celebrate, including James, who flew in from whatever corner of the world his research had taken him to, and Matthew, who was now 14 and already talking about becoming a scientist like his uncle. They watched Eleanor's Family Feud episode together as a family, something they had done many times before, but which felt different now, more complete. They cried together, watching it, but they also laughed, remembering Thomas, celebrating how far they had come, marveling at the strength and love that had carried them through the darkest period of their lives. Eleanor told them that she believed Thomas had been watching over all of them, that his love had never stopped even though his physical presence had ended, and that the promise she had kept by going on Family Feud had somehow been part of a larger promise, a promise that the family would survive, would stay connected, would continue to love and support each other no matter what. Matthew, now a teenager, had kept the notebook of Family Feud answers that he had made when they first applied to the show. He showed it to his grandmother, and they looked through it together, comparing the answers he had predicted to the answers she had actually given. Many of them matched, a testament to how, well, he knew his family even at such a young age. But what moved Eleanor to tears was the inscription Matthew had written on the inside cover of the notebook after watching her episode. It said, "To Grandma Eleanor, the bravest person I know, who kept a promise and taught me that love is stronger than anything, even death, even distance, even fear. Love wins, always." Eleanor framed that notebook page and hung it next to Thomas's urn, creating a small shrine to family love that occupied a place of honor in her home. Steve Harvey stayed in touch with the Hayes family over the years. He called Eleanor on holidays, sent flowers on the anniversary of Thomas's death, checked in on Rebecca's health, congratulated James on his research publications, and sent Matthew birthday cards. The connection they had formed on that extraordinary day at the Family Feud taping had become a genuine relationship, a friendship built on shared emotional experience and mutual respect. 5 years after Eleanor's appearance on the show, Steve invited the entire Hayes family back for a special anniversary episode. This time, Eleanor didn't stand alone at the podium. Rebecca stood beside her, healthy and strong, her hair grown back after chemo, her eyes bright with life and gratitude. James stood there too, having arranged his research schedule specifically to be present for this moment. And Matthew, now 17, and preparing to apply to colleges to study environmental science like his uncle, stood tall and proud next to his grandmother. The 5th spot at the podium, Thomas's spot, remained symbolically empty, marked with a photograph of him smiling, a visual reminder of the man whose dying wish had started this entire journey. They played the game together as a family this time, and the joy was palpable. They weren't the best players, they gave some silly answers and wrong guesses, but they laughed together and supported each other and celebrated every point they scored. When they won a round, they did Matthew's special handshake, all 4 of them participating in the complicated series of movements that had become a family tradition. When they lost a round, they hugged each other and joked that Thomas would have known the answer, bringing his memory into the moment with love rather than sadness. During a break in the taping, Steve sat down with the family for a longer conversation that would be included in the episode. He asked each of them to reflect on what had happened 5 years earlier and how it had affected their lives. Eleanor spoke about how keeping her promise to Thomas had helped her navigate her grief, had given her a purpose in those dark early months after his death when getting out of bed felt impossible. She said that knowing she had to go on Family Feud, that she had to be strong enough to represent her whole family, had forced her to keep going when part of her wanted to give up. Rebecca talked about watching her mother's episode from her hospital bed and how it had changed her perspective on her cancer battle. She realized that she had a choice in how she faced her illness, that she could give up or she could fight with the same courage her mother had shown. She chose to fight, and while she credited her doctors and her treatment for her remission, she also credited her mother's example for giving her the mental and emotional strength to endure the treatment. James spoke about watching the video in the Arctic and feeling connected to his family, despite being thousands of miles away. He said it had made him rethink his priorities, had made him more intentional about staying connected to his family, even when his work took him to remote corners of the world. He now made sure to call home more regularly, to be present for important family moments, even if it meant adjusting his research schedule. Matthew, the youngest, spoke with a maturity beyond his 17 years. He said that losing his grandfather and nearly losing his mother had taught him that time with family was precious, that love was the most important thing, and that keeping promises mattered. He said his grandmother had shown him what integrity looked like, what it meant to honor your word even when it was hard, what it meant to love people fiercely and completely. He said those lessons had shaped who he was becoming as a person, and he hoped he could live his life in a way that would make both his grandfather and his grandmother proud. Steve listened to all of this with tears in his eyes once again. He told the Hayes family that they had given him and millions of viewers a gift, the gift of seeing what real love looks like, what real family looks like, how people can survive devastating loss and come out stronger on the other side. He said that Eleanor's decision to come to Family Feud alone, to play for her whole family, to keep her promise to Thomas, had created ripples that extended far beyond their own family, had touched people all over the world who needed to see that kind of courage and love. The anniversary episode aired to even more viewers than the original, as people who had been moved by Eleanor's story 5 years earlier tuned in to see how the family was doing. The response was overwhelming once again. Viewers expressed their joy at seeing Rebecca healthy, their admiration for the family's resilience, their appreciation for the update on a story that had touched their hearts. Many viewers said they had been following the Hayes family's journey through social media and news updates, feeling invested in their story in a way they had never felt about television personalities before. The authenticity of the Hayes family's experience, the realness of their pain and their love and their healing, had created a connection that transcended typical viewer show relationships. As the years continued to pass, the Hayes family maintained their close bonds. They had family dinners every Sunday when James was in town, and they did video calls when he was traveling. Rebecca remained in remission and became an advocate for cancer patients, speaking at support groups and fundraising events, always crediting her mother's strength as part of what had pulled her through. Matthew went to college to study environmental science, driven by his uncle's example and his grandfather's memory. Eleanor continued to live in the home she had shared with Thomas, surrounded by memories and photographs, the urn with his ashes still holding a place of honor in her living room. On what would have been Thomas's 80th birthday, the family gathered at Eleanor's house for a celebration. They looked at old photographs, told favorite Thomas stories, and watched Eleanor's Family Feud episode one more time. Matthew, now in college, said that he had shown the episode to his friends and professors, that people were always moved by his grandmother's courage and his family's story. Rebecca said she sometimes watched the episode when she was having a hard day, when fear about cancer recurrence crept in, because it reminded her of her own strength and her family's love. James said he had shown the episode at a conference once, using it as an example of how humans respond to crisis and loss, and that there hadn't been a dry eye in the room. Eleanor sat in her favorite chair, the same chair Thomas used to sit in, and she smiled. She said she had never imagined that keeping a simple promise to her dying husband would lead to all of this, would create such a lasting impact. But she was grateful for it, grateful that their story had helped others, grateful that Thomas's memory lived on, not just in their family, but in the hearts of people who had never met him. She said she still talked to Thomas every day, still asked his opinion on decisions, still felt his presence guiding her. Death had separated them physically, but it hadn't ended their relationship. Love, real love, didn't work that way. Steve Harvey said in an interview years later that of all the episodes of Family Feud he had hosted, of all the thousands of families he had met, the Hayes family stood out as the most impactful. He said Eleanor Hayes had taught him something essential about the human capacity for love, for courage, for keeping promises even when everything falls apart. He said that moment when she stood alone at the podium and explained why she had come by herself was the moment he had felt most honored to be a host, most aware that television could be more than entertainment, that it could be a space for real human stories to be witnessed and honored. He kept a photograph in his office of Eleanor standing at the podium with the 4 empty spaces beside her, a visual reminder of that extraordinary day and the lesson it had taught him about family, love, and the promises we keep to the people we love even after they're gone. The Hayes family's story reminds us that family isn't just about who's physically present, it's about who lives in our hearts and shapes our actions. It shows us that keeping promises matters, even when it's hard, even when circumstances have changed everything we expected. It demonstrates that love persists beyond death, that the people we lose continue to influence and guide us if we stay open to their memory and their legacy. And it proves that courage isn't the absence of fear or pain, it's the choice to keep going, to keep loving, to keep honoring our commitments, even when everything inside us wants to give up. As we close this remarkable story, take a moment to think about the promises you've made to the people you love, about the ways you honor family members who can't be physically present, about the courage it takes to stand alone while carrying others in your heart. Eleanor Hayes showed us all what that looks like, and her example continues to inspire people around the world. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think differently about family or love or promises, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share these stories because we believe that real families facing real challenges with extraordinary courage deserve to be celebrated. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's grieving, someone who's fighting their own battle, someone who needs a reminder that love is stronger than loss, that promises matter, and that families carry each other even when they can't stand side by side. Eleanor Hayes came to Family Feud alone, but she was never truly alone. And in showing us that truth, she gave us all a gift, the understanding that the people we love are always with us, woven into who we are, shaping how we move through the world, giving us strength we didn't know we had. That's the real prize, not money or fame, but the enduring power of love that death itself cannot diminish.